So initially I was going to make a roster review video, but then as I thought the video out, I realized that most of it's just going to be me talking about Breaker anyways. So I spent the first 2 weeks on Asura, and then I spent the last week on BK, Brawl King Storm, Burger King. And I think a lot of people went into this class thinking they're going to play Asura, but then there's a lot of people who end up liking BK more. I'm currently struggling between the two. I actually really enjoy things about both of them. They're both fun. This is a rare occasion where I actually really like both engravings of a class. So I want to give my early impressions on each engraving and why it's such a struggle for me. I do consider them both to be burst classes, which is pretty uncommon to have both of your builds be the same. What is even more surprising is how different they play and feel. Something that is the same on both of them is how they use their stamina and shock meter, which is there at the bottom. Yellow skills use stamina, everything else uses shock. Using one gives you meter to the other type, and then also time will just give you stamina back. BK is your more standard burst spec class. You have 6 skills that you're going to use to build up your meter, your gauge, and the majority of this is going to be stamina skills, so you do have a pretty strict rotation because you're going to want to use that shock skill to get your stamina back. Since the majority are stamina skills, they do have relatively lower cooldowns, but still if you do whiff some skills, you're still going to be delaying your burst quite a bit if you're not hitting the boss. Oh, by the way, earlier I said 6 skills because you don't really want to use either Storm or Celestial Force Barrage without your burst. Now there is a case that if you do whiff too many things and you're way behind in your rotation, you can use Barrage to kind of make that up, but you do want to save that for your burst, and then you never want to use either Storm outside of burst. That bad boy is a 40-second cooldown. And also BK is preferred to play non-positional. Asura, on the other hand, that is actually a front attack class. So what makes Asura different then is that it is actually a crit class. So you don't have to worry about a stat affecting how fast you gain meter. Instead, how this engraving works is when you alternate between shock to stamina or stamina to shock, you're going to get 4% of your gauge regardless. So as Asura, you're basically just hitting what's off cooldown as long as it's going to be stamina to shock or shock to stamina. And one of the more unique and interesting things about Asura is you do not have to hit the boss to be building meter like this. You can just be sitting there swinging into the air and you're going to be getting meter as long as you're rotating your skills properly. So if you didn't know that about Asura breakers before and you're wondering why every breaker seems to be pretty schizo during downtime, that's why. Because you're always constantly alternating, you never really have to even notice that you have a shock or stamina gauge when you're playing Asura. I should also mention how they use ults different too. Butterfly does fill up your meter after you use it, however you really only use this on Asura. This is because Asura's burst will always be ready. For BK, Eye of the Storm is actually going to be a 40-second cooldown, so for BK you might actually be sitting on full gauge sometimes just waiting for Eye of the Storm. So since you cannot go back to back burst to burst on BK, you use Door instead, which I'm going to be honest, visually I love that one even more. So now let's talk about the burst itself because those are, again, very different. They're both very defining, not even just from each other, but from all the other classes in the game as well. Because even though I said earlier BK is more standard, there is something that is hugely different. With a level 3 engraving, which you should have, your burst mode is going to be 15 seconds long. Your main goal while in burst is to hit Eye of the Storm and Falling Blossom, which is a Z skill that you get after you burst. These skills is like 5 seconds on its own. You do want to hit Barrage too while you're in burst, but otherwise than that, that's still 3 skills that aren't really that long in a 15-second window. So earlier I mentioned that your burst frequency is limited to your Eye of the Storm. You need that off cooldown before you want to burst. When you are in burst mode, after you use a stamina skill, if you do an auto attack after, you're getting a cooldown reduction on all your skills. So you actually use that downtime there to get your cooldowns back. Because you cannot leave burst mode on your own or early, this is a forced cooldown phase. But something really more unique to BK2 is that since you have such a long window to do your burst, ideally, yes, you do want to do it at the start so you can get your cooldowns rolling again, but it doesn't hurt to wait a moment. Like if a boss instantly starts to teleport or something like that after you transition, you're still going to be able to hit your burst after. A lot of classes, generally when you do enter your burst mode, you have a tight window to do your entire burst, which is actually how Asura plays, so let's talk about that now. So when you use their burst called Asura State, you actually don't use any skills, you actually just use your auto attacks. Because when you are in this mode, your auto attacks trigger a flurry. Depending on how many flurries you do, you're going to get a finishing attack. There is a thread on Reddit about demystifying the Asura State. I will link that below, but I'm going to just give a few quick pointers on it. So if you click your attack, you are going to do your flurries faster, but you don't actually need to like super spam it. There was this idea that people had in their heads that you had to use a macro to do this, but because of how action queuing works, you don't really need to use that. But you definitely do want to click as opposed to holding because you are going to get more attacks out. And then additionally, there is a thing called sequence breaking. You might think it's fancy because it's a cool name, but it's just getting 2 finishers off in your Asura State. You end one early at about like 50 to 80% meter gone, and then you just start another one, and then you get a second finisher. If you're min-maxing this, your attack speed matters, and apparently so does FPS. So that's how Asura state works, and that's why it's really so different from anything else in the game. Nothing else really relies on just auto attacks. And since it is just your auto attacks, no cooldowns, you position yourself at the front, you pop it in, you just keep on swinging and hope it never moves so you can always get your frontal. There is no time to spare, you just want to keep on swinging. And something I haven't mentioned up till now is when you play Shura, you actually get an extra skill on your X key, which is a defensive stance. This is a no animation insta pop skill that gives you a lot of things. Damage reduction, age reduction on bad stuff and raids, also push immunity. The main use of this skill is actually going to be during your burst. Because this counts as a skill activation, you can use this in the middle of your flurries to keep your adrenaline up. It also might just keep you from dying. That's kind of important. So you do burst more often with BK since you're not at a 4% cap, as opposed to Asura, which again, they only get 4% of their gauge from every other rotating skill. But they also really benefit from downtime since they can build off nothing, and since you should be using Butterfly to instant refill your meter on that one, Asura has a more on-demand burst, well, once every 3 minutes or so. So now I think you can really understand that they both play very different. At a base level, they're kind of opposites from one another when you talk about in and outside of burst. When you are building, BK is a little bit more strict because you have a limited amount of skills. And also you have to pay attention to your shock and stamina, so it's more strict that way. Shura, on the other hand, is so freeform when you're building that you can just even whiff skills and you're still gaining out of it. The only thing you have to worry about is making sure that you are alternating between shock and stamina skills. And then after that, it completely flips when you're talking about doing a burst. As a BK, you have more than enough time to get your burst off and then start working on some cooldown reduction, which makes it a very low stress burst window. For Shura Breaker, if you are not front attacking, just swinging out in the front from start to finish, it's Jover for you. And since you do have the defensive and it's not like it's a super long animation, as long as you pick the right moments, it's not that bad. And also a fun perk about being a Shura, since your flurry scales off crit, you actually want to maximize as much crit rate that you can on yourself naturally. Crit synergies will not affect this. So what happens is if you are in a proper build, a crit synergy is going to overcap you on crit and you're not going to get all the benefits off a crit sin in your party. So this is the only engraving in the game that I can think of that's a DPS that doesn't want a crit sin. So now if you're a newer player or somebody who hasn't made a breaker yet and you're looking at this video to kind of get an understanding of the class and kind of see where you should go with it, ultimately I would say play whatever one sounds better to you, but a full answer of your experience starting off with either one is going to be this. If you start off and play Asura, you're going to feel the class as it's intended to be played very quickly. Because there is nothing to affect your meter gain, you're always getting 4% every time you alternate, there is no bottleneck for you. BK on the other hand, you do want high spec, you do want your tripods, and you do want wealth runes. Now something that's pretty unique about Breaker is it actually doesn't have that high of requirements in these departments. If we look at the community guides, we can get away with as little as 1565 spec with 2 epic wealth runes, otherwise 1635 spec with 1 epic wealth rune. Most classes in this game, most spec classes in the game are going to say, hey, you need all your wealth runes, and also you're going to need 1800 spec. When you have 1800 spec and everything on this on BK, you're actually able to change some tripods off meter generation ones and actually give yourself more comfort in other areas. So while you do need other sources to make BK feel really good, it's really not that bad. I'm playing with all level 4 tripods right now. This is because I don't have enough level 5 amulets to fund both builds and I haven't decided which one I'm going yet, which engraving, so I'm just saving those until I decide. So my rotations are a little bit longer because I don't have the right tripods, or more accurately, I don't have them high enough. And regardless, this class still feels really good for me. Tripods for this character, once you get them done, they're done forever on this character, and then runes is a roster-wide investment. You should really be working on your runes regardless, even if you do play Asura, because down the line you might want to play a spec class, but also don't buy tripods. Just level them naturally as you do Chaos Dungeon. Buying them is such a waste of golden peons. And that really sums it up. BK will take a little bit more time and effort to feel as intended, but it's not that bad, while Asura is going to feel as intended right away. So what about me? I'm struggling. I really haven't put my finger on which one I'm going to play. It's been a very hard choice. I've been thinking about diversifying my roster a little bit more, so he is a potential throw into the roster because I live in a perpetual character crisis, even on 1610 characters, so I'm considering benching. So yeah, Breaker and Deathblade are fighting for their lives there for their spots on the roster. Considering the fights moving forward, Asura is actually going to pop off quite hard. KR players have said that Theamine, Echidna, and Behemoth all have very big damage windows. Behemoth they literally just called Trixion, so classes with those very tight positional bursts like Asura is really going to pop off if true. But even with that in mind, I think I'm leaning towards BK. If it wasn't for gems, I would easily play them both. So for those of you who have a breaker, which route are you going to go? And if for some reason you didn't make a breaker, tell me why you didn't. What else did you make instead of that with your power pass? And was it worth it? But anyways, thanks for watching and I'll catch you next time.